24 hours before my divorce was finalized, my husband told me I'd never find anyone better than him. 12 hours later, I was wearing a diamond ring from his Yale roommate. This is the story of how karma works in the most unexpected ways. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. He was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, confident, successful in finance, and had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the only person who mattered. When he focused that charm on me, I felt like I'd won the lottery. The whirlwind romance lasted 8 months. Bradley proposed at the top of the Willis Tower, with a ring that cost more than my car, and I said yes without hesitation. Everyone told us we were perfect together. His friends from Yale would joke that he'd finally found someone who could keep up with him intellectually. My friends thought I'd hit the jackpot. The wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. A lakeside ceremony in Michigan, 300 guests and a reception that went until dawn. Bradley's roommate from college, Marcus Chen, was his best man. During his speech, Marcus mentioned how Bradley had always been the guy who got everything he wanted, and how lucky I was to be chosen by him. At the time, I laughed along with everyone else. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the word chosen. The cracks started showing during our honeymoon in Tuscany. Bradley had this habit of correcting me in front of strangers, my pronunciation of Italian words, my choice of wine, even how I held my fork. He'd laugh it off as helping me become more refined, but each correction felt like a small paper cut. By the time we returned to our new apartment in Lincoln Park, I'd learned to stay quiet rather than risk being wrong. Bradley's career at Goldman Sachs consumed most of his energy. He'd leave for the office at 6 in the morning and rarely return before 10 at night. Weekend golf games with clients were mandatory, he explained. Dinners with his colleagues were essential for networking. I found myself eating alone more often than not, waiting for him to come home so we could have the conversations that never seemed to happen. When I started my own marketing consultancy, Bradley was less than supportive. He'd make comments about my little business and suggest I focus on being a better wife instead of chasing what he called amateur, entrepreneurial dreams. He never directly told me to quit, but his disapproval hung over every client meeting and late-night work session. The isolation crept in gradually. Bradley would decline social invitations on our behalf, claiming he was too tired or that my friends were not really our crowd. His friends became our only social circle, and their wives, if they worked at all, had jobs that Bradley deemed more appropriate for women of our social standing. I started to feel like I was disappearing into the life he'd designed for both of us. Marcus visited frequently during those first 2 years. He'd stayed in Chicago after college, working as a litigation attorney at a prestigious firm downtown. Unlike Bradley, Marcus actually listened when I talked about my work. He'd ask thoughtful questions about my clients and remember details from previous conversations. When Bradley would dismiss my business concerns, Marcus would quietly offer genuine advice or encouragement. The worst part wasn't the loneliness or the constant criticism. It was how I started to believe Bradley's version of reality. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe successful marriages require more compromise from wives. Maybe I should be grateful for the lifestyle he provided instead of complaining about feeling unheard. Everything changed last spring when I discovered the affair. Bradley had been working late again, or so I thought, until I found receipts from expensive restaurants I'd never been to, charged to his company card on nights when he claimed to be in client meeting. The detective I hired confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Bradley was seeing his assistant, a 24-year-old named Ashley, who laughed at all his jokes and never questioned his decisions. When I confronted him, Bradley didn't deny it. Instead, he seemed almost relieved that it was finally out in the open. "This marriage isn't working, Sarah," he said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table like we were having a business meeting. "We both know it. You're not happy, and frankly, neither am I." I expected him to end things with Ashley, to suggest counseling, to fight for us. Instead, he moved out the next weekend. The divorce papers were filed within a month. The settlement negotiations were brutal. Bradley's lawyer painted me as a gold digger who'd contributed nothing to our marriage. My own business, which I'd built from nothing while trying to be the perfect wife, was dismissed as a hobby. Bradley wanted to keep the apartment, the vacation home in Michigan, and most of our investment. He was willing to give me a modest settlement and temporary alimony, but only if I signed a non-disclosure agreement about the affair. Throughout the process, Marcus would stop by occasionally to check on me. He'd bring coffee and listen while I vented about the latest legal maneuver from Bradley's team. He never spoke badly about his former roommate, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "You deserve better than this, Sarah," he'd say quietly. "You deserve someone who sees how remarkable you are." The night before our final court date, Bradley called me. He was drunk, which I could tell from the slight slur in his voice and the way he kept repeating himself. "You know what, Sarah? You're making a mistake with this divorce. You think you're going to find someone better than me. You're 31 years old, you have trust issues now, and your little business isn't going to support the lifestyle you've gotten used to." He paused and I could hear ice clinking in his glass. "I'm being generous with this settlement because I feel sorry for you. But let's be realistic here. You're not going to find anyone better than me. You're going to end up alone, wondering what would have happened if you'd just been grateful for what you had." The call ended, and I sat in the empty apartment that had never felt like home, surrounded by boxes of the life I was leaving behind. For a moment, his words echoed in my head. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was making a terrible mistake. Maybe I should have tried harder to make it work. But then I remembered Marcus's words about deserving better, and I realized that Bradley's cruelty wasn't just about the divorce, it was about control. He needed me to believe I was lucky to have him, because without that belief, I might realize that I'd been settling for far less than I deserved. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window watching the city lights and thinking about the woman I'd been before Bradley, and the woman I wanted to become after him. Tomorrow, I will walk into that courthouse and close this chapter of my life. What I didn't know was that the story was about to take a turn that would surprise everyone, including me. The Cook County Courthouse felt like a monument to broken promises. I arrived 30 minutes early, clutching my purse and trying to ignore the churning in my stomach. My lawyer, Janet Morrison, met me at the security checkpoint with her usual professional smile, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "How are you holding up, Sarah?" she asked as we walked through the marble corridors toward the family court division. "I've been better," I admitted, my heels clicking against the polished floor. "Bradley called last night. He was drunk and said some things." Janet's expression hardened. "What kind of things?" "The usual. That I'll never find anyone better, that I'm making a mistake, that I should be grateful for what he's offering." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "Sarah, you know that's not true, right? You're walking away from this marriage because it wasn't working, not because you're ungrateful. Bradley's trying to manipulate you one last time." We settled into the waiting area outside Courtroom 4. The wooden benches reminded me of church pews, which felt appropriate given that I was about to witness the burial of my marriage. Other couples sat scattered throughout the room, some crying, others staring at their phones in stony silence. Everyone looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Bradley arrived, exactly on time, flanked by his attorney Robert Sterling, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary in Chicago legal circles. Bradley wore his best navy suit, the one he'd worn to our wedding, and he looked every inch the successful executive. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Ashley wasn't with him, which was a small mercy. He caught my eye and nodded, as if we were acquaintances meeting at a business conference. No emotion, no acknowledgement of the 3 years we'd spent building a life together, just cool professionalism. "Mrs. Richardson," a court clerk appeared at my elbow. "Judge Martinez is ready for you." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Judge Martinez, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, sat behind an imposing desk reviewing our file. "Good morning," she said without looking up. "I've reviewed the settlement agreement and the supporting documentation. Before we proceed, I need to ensure both parties understand the terms and are entering into this agreement voluntarily." What followed was 45 minutes of legal formalities, property division, alimony terms, asset distribution, Our entire marriage, reduced to line items on a spreadsheet. Bradley answered the judge's questions with the same detached efficiency he used in board meetings. When asked if he had any objections to the settlement, he simply said, "No, Your Honor, we're both ready to move forward." I signed where Janet indicated, my hand trembling slightly as I wrote my name on document after document. Each signature felt like erasing a piece of myself. When the judge finally announced that our divorce was granted, I felt nothing but emptiness. "Congratulations," Bradley said as we gathered our papers. "You got what you wanted." Before I could respond, the courtroom door opened, and Marcus Chen walked in. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit and carrying a small bouquet of white roses. For a moment, I thought he was there to support Bradley, but he walked directly to me. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but determined, "I'm sorry I'm late. I was waiting outside until the proceedings were finished." Bradley frowned. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Marcus ignored him, his attention focused entirely on me. "I have something I need to say to you and I couldn't wait any longer." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The handful of people still in the courtroom, other divorcing couples, lawyers, clerks, suddenly stopped their conversations. Even Judge Martinez, who had been preparing to leave, paused to watch. "Sarah, I've been in love with you for 2 years," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I never said anything because you were married to my friend, and I respected that. But watching you go through this divorce, seeing how Bradley treated you, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore." My heart stopped. Bradley's mouth fell open. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know the timing is unconventional and I know you probably need time to process everything that's happened, but I also know that life is short. And when you find someone who makes you want to be better, you don't let them walk away." He dropped to one knee right there in the courtroom, in front of everyone. "Sarah Mitchell, and yes, I'm using your maiden name because you're not his anymore. Will you marry me?" The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the rustle of papers as someone shifted in their seat. Bradley stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked like panic. "You've got to be kidding me," Bradley finally managed to say. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing?" Marcus didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed locked on mine, patient and hopeful. "I'm asking the woman I love to marry me. The woman who deserves to be cherished, not criticized. The woman who built a successful business while trying to save a marriage that was already over. The woman who has more strength and grace than anyone I've ever known." I looked at the ring in his hands. A classic solitaire diamond. Elegant and timeless, nothing like the ostentatious rock Bradley had chosen. But more than that, I looked at Marcus himself. This man who had quietly supported me through the darkest period of my life, who had listened to my dreams and encouraged my ambitions, who had never once made me feel small or inadequate. "This is insane," Bradley said, his voice rising. "You can't just, she's not going to. Sarah, you can't be serious about this." For the first time in 3 years, I felt completely clear about what I wanted. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and sure. "Yes, Marcus, I'll marry you." The courtroom erupted. People applauded. The court reporter smiled. And even Judge Martinez looked pleased. Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, then stood and kissed me gently. It was nothing like the passionate, possessive kisses Bradley used to give me. This was tender, respectful, full of promise. "Sarah, no," Bradley said, stepping toward us. "You can't do this, you're making a mistake. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly." I turned to face him, and for the first time in our relationship I saw him clearly. The handsome facade, the expensive suit, the confident posture. It was all armor protecting a deeply insecure man who needed to control others to feel powerful. "Actually, Bradley, I've never been thinking more clearly in my life," I said. "You told me I'd never find anyone better than you." "You were wrong." His face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. Marcus, you're making a fool of yourself. She's rebounds prone. She's got trust issues. She's remarkable," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "She's brilliant. She's strong. She's kind. And she deserves better than someone who spent 3 years trying to convince her she should be grateful for crumbs." Bradley looked around the courtroom, perhaps hoping for support, but found only curious faces and disapproving stares. His lawyer had already packed up his briefcase and was heading for the door. "This won't last," Bradley said, his voice desperate now. "You'll realize what you've lost, Sarah. You'll come crawling back, and I won't be there." "I certainly hope not," I replied, "because I'm never going backward again." Marcus took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "We should go," he said softly. "We have a celebration to plan." As we walked toward the courtroom door, I heard Bradley call my name one last time. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say to him. Nothing left to look back for. My future was walking beside me, holding my hand, believing in me in ways Bradley never had. The courthouse steps felt like a stage, and Chicago stretched out before us like a promise. Marcus helped me into his car, and as we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Bradley in the rearview mirror standing alone on the courthouse steps, finally understanding what he'd lost. The girl who had walked into that courthouse that morning was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had the courage to choose love over fear, and who was ready to build a life with someone who saw her as an equal partner, not a possession to be managed. The real story was just beginning. The media attention hit us like a tsunami. By the next morning, the story had spread through Chicago's social circles like wildfire. "Yale graduate proposes to friend's ex-wife at divorce hearing," was the headline that appeared in the Chicago Tribune's society section. The story painted Marcus as either a romantic hero or a betraying friend, depending on who was telling it. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, friends, and complete strangers who had somehow gotten my number. Marcus suggested we leave town for a few days, so we drove to his family's cabin in Wisconsin, where we could process what had happened without the circus following us. The cabin was everything Bradley would have hated: rustic, simple, filled with worn furniture and family photos dating back decades. But sitting on the porch with Marcus watching the sun set over the lake, I felt more at home than I had in years. "Do you regret it?" I asked him on our second night there. We were sitting by the fire sharing a bottle of wine that cost less than Bradley used to spend on lunch. "Which part?" Marcus smiled, but I could see the genuine concern in his eyes. "Proposing to you? Never. Doing it in front of Bradley? Maybe I could have handled that better." "I'm glad you did it exactly the way you did," I said. "If you'd waited, if you'd been more careful about his feelings, I might have talked myself out of it. I might have convinced myself I needed time to heal, or that it was too soon, or that I didn't deserve happiness." Marcus set down his wineglass and took my hands. "Sarah, I need you to know something. I didn't propose because I felt sorry for you, or because I wanted to rescue you from Bradley. I proposed because I've been in love with you since the night we met at your engagement party, and I finally had the courage to act on it." The engagement party. I remember that night clearly now. Marcus had been quiet, polite, and congratulatory, but he'd also been the one who stayed late to help clean up, who listened when I talked my dreams for the marketing company, who remembered details about my childhood that even Bradley forgot. "I knew you were going to marry him," Marcus continued, "and I respected that. But watching him diminish you, watching him treat your accomplishments like hobbies and your feelings like inconveniences, it was killing me. When you finally decided to leave him, I knew I had to tell you how I felt." 3 weeks later, we returned to Chicago to face the music. Bradley had been busy during our absence, apparently telling anyone who would listen that Marcus had stolen his wife, and that I was having some kind of breakdown. The story he was spreading painted me as unstable, and Marcus as opportunistic. The truth was messier, and more complicated, but also more beautiful. Marcus and I had spent those weeks in Wisconsin talking about everything: our childhoods, our dreams, our fears about the future. We discussed the ethics of our situation, the potential challenges of building a relationship in the aftermath of my divorce, and whether we were moving too fast. But we also laughed more than I had in years. Marcus had this dry sense of humor that complemented my own. And he genuinely enjoyed my company in a way that Bradley never had. Where Bradley saw conversations as opportunities to educate me, Marcus saw them as chances to learn from me. My business, which had languished during the final months of my marriage, suddenly began to flourish. Marcus encouraged me to pursue the larger clients I'd been afraid to approach, and he helped me develop a business plan that would allow me to expand beyond Chicago. Within 2 months, I had signed 3 major accounts and hired 2 additional staff members. You know what the difference is? I told Marcus one evening, as we reviewed contracts in his downtown apartment. You actually believe I can succeed. Bradley always acted like my success was a threat to his masculinity. Your success is one of the things I love most about you, Marcus replied. Why would I want to be with someone who was less than they could be? The wedding planning began in earnest that fall. We decided on a small ceremony in Marcus's family's backyard in Evanston, with just close family and friends. No ice sculptures, no designer dresses, no 300-person guest list, just the people who mattered most, celebrating something real. Bradley tried to interfere, of course. He called Marcus's law firm, suggesting that their relationship was unprofessional and that Marcus had violated some kind of ethical code. When that didn't work, he started spreading rumors about my business practices, claiming I was using my relationship with Marcus to gain unfair advantages with clients. The rumors were absurd. Marcus practiced family law, not corporate litigation, and our professional lives barely overlapped. But Bradley's desperation was becoming obvious to everyone except himself. His own life was falling apart. Ashley had left him for a partner at another firm, and his performance at work was suffering. Several of his college friends had distanced themselves from him after hearing about his behavior during the divorce. The turning point came at a mutual friend's birthday party 6 months after the courthouse proposal. Bradley showed up uninvited and cornered me near the bar. I hope you're happy, he said, his words slurred from too much whiskey. You think you won, but you didn't. Marcus is just trying to prove something to himself. He's always been jealous of me, always wanted what I had. Bradley, you're embarrassing yourself, I said, looking around for Marcus, who was across the room talking to the host. You were mine first, he continued, louder now. We had something real, something that mattered. This thing with Marcus is just rebound fantasy. What we had was real, I said calmly, really dysfunctional, really one-sided, really unhealthy. But yes, it was real. Other party guests were starting to stare. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his expression carefully neutral. Bradley, he said evenly. I think you should leave. Oh, the knight in shining armor, Bradley sneered. Tell me, Marcus, do you actually love her, or do you just love the idea of having something I used to have? Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. I love Sarah for who she is, not for who she belonged to. The fact that you can't understand the difference says everything about why your marriage failed. That was the last time Bradley tried to insert himself into our lives. Word spread quickly through their social circles about his behavior at the party, and the few people who had been willing to excuse his earlier actions as heartbreak finally wrote him off completely. Our wedding day arrived on a perfect October morning. The leaves were changing colors. The air was crisp and Marcus's family's backyard had been transformed into something magical with string lights and seasonal flowers. My mother walked me down the aisle, and Marcus's sister officiated the ceremony. The vows we exchanged were nothing like the elaborate promises Bradley and I had made at our lakeside ceremony. Instead, they were simple, honest, and focused on the future we wanted to build together. Marcus promised to support my dreams, to trust my judgment, and to never make me feel small. I promised to love him for who he was, not who I thought he could become, and to build a partnership based on mutual respect. As we kissed to seal our marriage, I caught sight of the guests, our families, our real friends, the people who had supported us through the chaos of the past year. Not one of them questioned whether we were moving too fast or making a mistake. They could see what Bradley had never been able to see, that we brought out the best in each other. The reception was held at a small restaurant in Evanston, where we danced to jazz music and shared stories with the people who mattered most. There were no ice sculptures, no elaborate floral arrangements, no photographers capturing every moment for social media, just genuine joy, genuine celebration, and genuine love. Later that evening, as we sat on the hotel balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, Marcus asked me if I had any regrets. About what? I asked, curled up against his side. About the way it all happened. The timing, the drama, the publicity. Would you have preferred a different story? I thought about it for a moment. You know what? I'm glad it happened exactly the way it did. If you hadn't proposed that day, if you'd waited for a more appropriate time, I might have spent months or years rebuilding myself before I was ready to trust someone new. But you saw me at my lowest point and still wanted to build a life with me. That's not something I'll ever take for granted. A year later, my business had expanded to 3 cities, and Marcus had made partner at his firm. We bought a house in Lincoln Park, ironically just 2 blocks from the apartment Bradley and I had shared. But this house felt completely different. It was ours, chosen together, filled with furniture we'd selected as a team, and art that reflected both of our tastes. Bradley had moved to New York supposedly for a better job opportunity, but really to escape the social consequences of his behavior. We heard through mutual friends that he was dating someone new, a woman who worked in marketing and bore a striking resemblance to me. Some people never learn. The most satisfying part wasn't Bradley's downfall, it was the life Marcus and I built together. We traveled, we worked, we supported each other's ambitions, and we never stopped being genuinely excited to come home to each other at the end of each day. People often ask me if I believe in fate, if I think everything happens for a reason. I don't know about fate, but I do know that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads directly to the best thing. Getting divorced was devastating, but it was also the door that led me to the life I was meant to have. And Bradley? He was wrong about everything. I did find someone better. I found someone who saw my worth, who celebrated my success, who treated me as an equal partner in all things. I found someone who proposed not because he wanted to possess me, but because he wanted to build something beautiful together. The girl who walked into that courthouse thinking she was ending her story was wrong. She was actually just turning the page. The notification popped up on my phone while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office, overlooking the Chicago River. LinkedIn was informing me that Bradley Richardson had viewed my profile. Again, this was the 3rd time this month, and it was becoming a pattern I couldn't ignore. 5 years had passed since that dramatic day in the courthouse, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Mitchell Marketing Solutions now had offices in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Detroit, with a team of 32 employees and a client roster that included some of the Midwest's most prestigious companies. The little business that Bradley had once dismissed was now generating 8 figures in annual revenue. Marcus and I had just returned from a business trip to Austin, where we'd been exploring the possibility of opening our 4th office. He'd taken a sabbatical from his law firm to help me with the expansion, and watching him dive into the world of marketing strategy with the same passion he'd once reserved for litigation reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Another profile view? Marcus asked, looking up from his laptop where he was analyzing market penetration data for Texas. How did you know? You get that specific look on your face when Bradley's name appears anywhere in your digital orbit. It's like you're trying to solve a puzzle you don't really want to solve. I closed the LinkedIn app and set my phone aside. It's just strange, you know? What does he want? What is he looking for? Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering. Maybe he's just curious about how you're doing, or maybe he's realized what he lost and he's torturing himself by keeping tabs on your success. The success was undeniable. Beyond the business expansion, I'd been featured on the cover of Chicago Business Magazine as one of the city's top entrepreneurs under 40. I'd given a TEDx talk about building authentic brands in a digital age that had been viewed over 2 million times. I'd written a book about entrepreneurship that had spent 6 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. More importantly, Marcus and I had built something that went far beyond professional achievements. We'd bought a house in Winnetka with a garden where we grew tomatoes and herbs. We'd traveled to 23 countries together, always making time to explore local markets and small businesses. We'd learned to cook Thai food, taken pottery classes, and spent countless evenings reading different books in comfortable silence. We'd also weathered real challenges together. The year my mother was diagnosed with cancer, Marcus had quietly rearranged his entire schedule to drive with me to every appointment. When his father had a heart attack, I'd taken over the legal aspects of his family's small business while Marcus focused on his recovery. These weren't the dramatic romantic gestures that movies celebrate, but they were the foundation of a partnership that had grown stronger with each passing year. The strangest thing about Bradley's continued digital surveillance was how little I thought about him in daily life. Occasionally, mutual friends would mention seeing him at events or share updates about his career, but he'd become a character from a story I'd once lived rather than a real person who continued to affect my present. That changed on a Tuesday evening in March when he called me directly. I was at home, testing a new recipe for Marcus's birthday dinner, when my phone rang. The Chicago number wasn't in my contacts, but something about it seemed familiar. "Sarah, it's Bradley." I nearly dropped the phone. His voice was exactly the same, but there was something different about his tone. Less commanding, more tentative. "Bradley," I said, turning off the stove and moving to the living room. "This is unexpected." "I know. I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" There was a long pause. "About us. About what happened. About the mistakes I made." I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. "Bradley, that was 5 years ago. We're both different people now. I'm not sure what there is to talk about." "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he said, and I could hear traffic in the background. "I've been following your career, and I'm impressed by what you've accomplished. I always knew you had it in you." The casual revisionism was breathtaking. "You spent 3 years telling me my business was a hobby. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things." His voice cracked slightly. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go." "You didn't let me go, Bradley. You cheated on me and then moved out." I know I screwed up. But I've learned from it. I've been in therapy. I've done the work to understand why I acted the way I did, and I realized that what we had was special. It was real." I looked around the living room that Marcus and I had decorated together. The bookshelves filled with both of our favorite novels, the photos from our travels, the paintings we'd bought from a street artist in Barcelona. This was real. What Bradley and I had shared was something else entirely. "Bradley, I'm married to Marcus now. We've built a life together. I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish with this conversation." "I heard about the marriage," he said quickly, "but I also heard things haven't been easy. The business expansion, the travel, the pressure, that's a lot of stress on a relationship." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who told you that?" "People talk, Sarah. I still have friends in Chicago. I know you and Marcus have been having problems." The audacity was stunning. "We haven't been having problems, Bradley. We've been building an empire together." "There's a difference. Come on, Sarah. Be honest with me. Are you really happy? Are you really satisfied with the life you've chosen? Or do you sometimes wonder what would have happened if we'd worked things out?" The question hung in the air, between us. Did I ever wonder? Of course I did. Anyone who'd been through a divorce wondered about alternate timelines, about the roads not taken. But wondering wasn't the same as regretting, and curiosity wasn't the same as longing. "I'm going to be in Chicago next week," Bradley continued when I didn't respond. "I'd like to take you to dinner, just to talk, to catch up properly." "I don't think that's a good idea." "One dinner? Sarah, what's the harm in that? We were married for 3 years. We shared a life. Don't you think we owe it to ourselves to have an honest conversation about what went wrong?" I was quiet for a long moment, thinking, Part of me was curious about what Bradley had become, whether he'd really changed or if this was just another manipulation. But a larger part of me recognized the danger in that curiosity. Bradley, I appreciate that you've been working on yourself, and I hope you've found peace with what happened between us. But I've moved on. I've built a life with someone who loves and respects me exactly as I am. I don't need closure from our marriage because I'm not carrying it with me anymore. So that's it? You won't even consider seeing me? That's it. The line went quiet for so long that I thought he'd hung up. Then he spoke again, and his voice had changed. The tentative, apologetic tone was gone, replaced by something harder and more familiar. You know, Sarah, I've been watching your success from a distance, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've really shown me what you're capable of when you're not being held back. Held back by what? By marriage, by compromise, by having to consider someone else's feelings and needs. You've flourished since you've been free to focus entirely on yourself. I felt the old familiar manipulation creeping in, the subtle way he'd always twisted reality to serve his purposes. I'm not free to focus entirely on myself, Bradley. I'm in a partnership with someone who supports my ambitions instead of being threatened by them. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're carrying the relationship. Marcus left his career to help with your business. You're the one traveling. You're the one making the big decisions. You're the one whose name is on the magazine covers. What exactly is he contributing to? The question was designed to plant seeds of doubt, to make me question the foundation of my marriage. 5 years ago, it might have worked. But I'd learned to recognize Bradley's tactics, and more importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment. He's contributing everything that matters, I said calmly. He's contributing partnership, support, love, and respect. He's contributing the kind of presence that makes success meaningful instead of just impressive. Sarah, you're being naive. Men don't actually want successful women. They say they do, but deep down, they want to be needed. They want to feel superior. Marcus may be playing the supportive husband now, but eventually, he's going to resent your success. He's going to want you to scale back, to make room for his ego. You're projecting, Bradley. You're describing how you felt about my success, not how Marcus feels. I'm describing how all men feel about it. The difference is that I was honest about it. Marcus is just better at hiding it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Marcus was installing a new trellis for our climbing roses. He'd spent the entire weekend researching the best varieties for our climate, not because he particularly cared about roses, but because I'd mentioned wanting to try growing them. Bradley, I need to go. Marcus is making dinner and we have plans tonight. Of course he is. The perfect husband, doing the domestic duties while his wife runs the empire. How long do you think that dynamic is going to last? Goodbye, Bradley. I hung up the phone and immediately called Marcus outside. He dropped his tools and came running when he heard the tone in my voice. What's wrong? He asked, pulling me into his arms. Bradley called. He wants to have dinner with me next week when he's in town. He says he's changed, that he wants to talk about our marriage. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his arms tightening around me. What did you tell him? I told him no, but he didn't take it well. He started saying things about our marriage, about how you must resent my success, about how I'm carrying the relationship. I pulled back to look at Marcus's face. He's trying to plant doubt. Is it working? The question was asked lightly, but I could see the genuine concern in Marcus's eyes. Not jealousy or insecurity, but worry for my well-being. No, I said firmly. It's not working, because I know the difference between a man who supports my dreams and a man who tolerates them. I know the difference between a partnership and a power struggle. Marcus smiled, but I could see he was still processing. You know, it's funny. When we were in college, Bradley always had this theory that relationships were essentially competitions. Someone always had to be winning, someone always had to be losing. I never understood that perspective until I watched him with you. And now I understand that he was describing his relationships, not relationships in general. What we have isn't a competition, it's a collaboration. That night, as we sat on the porch after dinner, Marcus brought up the subject again. I want you to know that if you ever did want to have dinner with Bradley, I wouldn't object. I trust you completely, and I'm not threatened by your past. And I know you're not. That's one of the reasons I married you. I took his hand, but I don't want to see him. Not because I'm afraid of what might happen, but because I'm not curious about who he's become. I'm too busy being excited about who we're becoming. 3 months later, I was giving a keynote speech at a marketing conference in Denver when I spotted a familiar face in the audience. Bradley was sitting in the third row, taking notes and watching me intently. He was wearing an expensive suit and looked every inch the successful executive, but there was something different about his posture, something less confident than I remembered. After my presentation, he approached me at the reception. Sarah, that was an incredible talk. You've really found your voice. Thank you, I said politely, scanning the room for an escape route. I was hoping we could grab coffee while we're both here, just to catch up. I looked at him carefully. The aggressive manipulation from our phone conversation was gone, replaced by something that seemed more genuine. But I'd learned not to trust the surface with Bradley. I don't think that's a good idea, Bradley. I understand. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you during our marriage. For the way I handled the divorce. For the phone call a few months ago. I was out of line. I appreciate that. I also wanted to say that I'm genuinely happy for you. What you've built is remarkable, and you deserve all the success you've achieved. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But this felt different. There was a sadness in his eyes that seemed real, a weariness that spoke of genuine self-reflection. Thank you, I said finally. That means something. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. I know I burned that bridge completely, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost, and I take full responsibility for losing it. He started to walk away, then turned back. For what it's worth, I think Marcus is a lucky man, and I think you chose well. That was the last time I saw Bradley Richardson. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved to Seattle and was engaged to a woman who worked in nonprofit development. I felt genuinely happy for him, in the way you feel happy for someone who's finally found their way after being lost for a long time. The final chapter of our story came 2 years later, when Marcus and I were featured together on the cover of Fortune magazine for a story about power couples redefining success. The article chronicled how we'd built our respective careers while maintaining a partnership that strengthened both of us. During the interview, the reporter asked me about the secret to balancing a successful marriage with entrepreneurial ambitions. I think the key is finding someone who sees your success as their success, I said, looking at Marcus across the conference table where we were conducting the interview. Someone who celebrates your victories instead of feeling threatened by them, and finding someone whose definition of success aligns with yours, Marcus added. For us, success isn't just about individual achievements, it's about what we've built together. The reporter pressed for more details about the challenges of maintaining a relationship while building a business empire. But the truth was that our relationship had never felt like a challenge to overcome. It had felt like the foundation that made everything else possible. As we left the magazine's offices that day, walking hand in hand through downtown Chicago, I thought about the woman who had sat in that courthouse 7 years earlier, convinced that her story was ending. She had no idea that she was actually just beginning the most beautiful chapter of her life. Bradley had been wrong about everything. I had found someone better. I had built something lasting. And I had learned that the most powerful thing you can do in life is to refuse to accept someone else's limitations of who you can become. The girl who had once believed she should be grateful for scraps had grown into a woman who knew she deserved the entire feast, and the man who had once told her she'd never find better had become a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the person you're supposed to love. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living well, loving deeply and building something beautiful with someone who sees your worth. Sometimes it's proving that the person who said you'd never find better was really just describing the limitations of their own imagination. The courthouse steps, where Bradley had once stood alone, watching his former life drive away, had become a monument to the power of recognizing your own worth. And the woman who had walked down those steps that day had become living proof that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not about getting revenge on someone who hurt you, but about having the courage to choose the life you deserve. It's about recognizing that when someone tells you that you'll never find better, they're really telling you more about their own limitations than about your possibilities. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person who sees your worth is standing right there in the courthouse waiting for the courage to ask you to build something beautiful together. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.